Hey everyone, welcome to another lesson from Lesson Up Squad. Today we'll be doing inventories. So these are all the things we're looking to learn today, including what is inventory, how to calculate your profit on inventory, how inventory moves from asset and becomes an expense, the different valuation methods, how to calculate closing inventory, cost of sales, GP, theft of inventory and how to improve, and how to determine if you've got actually enough stock for your business. Okay, so this is the question we'll be using for our lesson today, and you see that it is 35 marks and you are expected to spend 20 minutes on this question. So that means you have to use your time wisely and you need to know what you're doing. With inventory, you just need to always understand what you're doing and what is it that the information they've given me and how do I use that to get to the answer they require. A lot of the theory questions, I usually will use the same formulas. There are very limited ratios that you use with inventory. So always make sure with your inventory questions, you know that these are the certain ratios you can use and keep them at the back of your mind. Okay, so you've got Yankees Electronics sells LCD flat screen television sets. The business is owned by Jane Yankees. As she has other businesses to run, she cannot be at the shop very often. She employs Marlon Miller to run the shop for her. The business uses the periodic inventory system and the Fifo method to value the stock. The financial year end is 28 February 2015. All right, so there's two important elements, or rather three important elements from this that you should pick up. One, they use a periodic inventory system. Number two, they're FIFO. Number three, their financial year end is February, and also they deal with TVs, right? So these are the three or four things you should have picked up just by reading that, and keep it at the back of your mind. You can highlight them, you can write them down, but keep this at the back of your mind because you're going to need these points when you're answering your questions further, right? So here we've got more information about the businesses. Always remember with inventory, it's very important to note what you're looking at. You're looking at the number of units here, which means that's your physical inventory number, right? That's your unit price. This is how much each unit costs, including carriage. Once again, important to note, it's including carriage. Transport cost needs to be included part of the value of your inventory. So if you purchase something for 100 Rand and it costs you 20 Rand to transport that item, the cost of your inventory is 120 Rand, not 100 Rand. Your cost to transport would not have incurred if you did not buy that inventory. Therefore, rightfully, the cost needs to be included part of the value of the inventory. Okay, your total would usually be the number of units multiplied by your unit price. You can see that is your opening balance. You can also see 28 February 2015. You've got your closing number of stock, but you don't have the value of the stock, right? So you don't know what it's worth. And that is probably going to be one of your potential questions in the exams. How to calculate closing inventory. Okay, we've also got some more information regarding the purchases. It's very important to know what you've purchased and what price you've purchased at for FIFO so that you know how to value your inventory. And you'll see you've also got your carriage cost stated here separately, which gives you your total. Okay, we've got some more information about 3 television sets from August. Purchases were damaged and the television sets were returned to the suppliers. The suppliers also reversed the carriage on these items. So you can see, although your number of units you've purchased is 120, rightfully it should be 117 and not 120 because you've actually returned the 3 back to the supplier. You can't sell those. Okay, you also have some information regarding that there could be some possibility of theft in these television sets. All right, so the first question says calculate the value of the closing stock of 145 television sets on the 28th of February using the FIFO method. So with FIFO, we know the inventory that you had first, you sold first. So your closing inventory, which is your 145 units, comprises of inventory that you purchased last. If we go to our purchases, the inventory we purchased last was 90, 120, and before that we purchased 150 units. So very common, you'll never be given the exact quantities that you've sold, that were purchased during the year. So you know you're left with 145. So the first step is to determine which part of the purchase will give you 145 units. You've got 90, right? So that will form part of your closing balance because it's less than 145 and you want to get to 145, and then the balance you can see was easily bought from the 120. The balance of 145 minus 90, we've got 55 units from the 120 that haven't been sold, that are our closing inventory at the end of the year. So now that you've determined the units, you know the 90 units, right? Well, the cost of the 90 units is 4,450 per unit. You've got your carriage and in total 411,000. So you can use for your 90 units the full total of 411,000 because nothing was sold of this 90 unit, right? But you've got, when you move on to your 55 units, which are part of your 120 units, here you would need to calculate the cost of your unit, right? You've got your unit 4,750, but this is excluding your carriage. Remember, when we're valuing inventory, we need a value of the inventory, what your inventory is worth, including your carriage, because you wouldn't have incurred the cost of the inventory, of the carriage, if you didn't buy inventory. Therefore, you have to include the cost of your inventory. To calculate your cost of the inventory, you would just take your total value divided by 120 units, which gives you your 4,875. That's your cost per your unit. And you've got cost per unit, so it's your 4,875. Multiply that by your 55 units, which gives you 268,000. And thereafter, you would have to add both of them, your 90 units and your 55 units. You would see each of the units have a separate value. Your 90 unit has a value of 4,450, whereas your 55 units have a value of 4,875, including your carriage. So the price of the inventory differs because of the cost of the inventory and the carriage of the inventory, right? But you have to use the amount including inventory, including the carriage. The reason you could use the full 411,000 was because none of this inventory was sold and you had the total value, so you didn't have to recalculate the unit value. But here in the 120, you only had 55 units left of the 120, so you wanted to know what it would cost including carriage, and therefore you calculated. Another way to calculate that would have been to use 4,750 as a unit price plus 15,000, which you would have had for 120 units. So you divide it by 120 and you multiply it for 55 units. You'd get a value and you'd get to the same answer of 268,125 to give you a total of 679,000. Okay, our next question for 10 marks is to calculate the cost of sales and the average markup, right? Remember, for cost of sales, there's a standard formula: opening plus purchases minus your closing. In this case, you would also have to remember minusing the returns from your suppliers, right? And the reason is that when you use your purchases, you're going to use your full value of your purchase of 360 units, but that's not true. You didn't purchase 360 because you returned 3, so you actually purchased 357. Now to calculate that, that would be more difficult to do it if you want to calculate the value of your 357. So what you do is you add your 360 units purchases minus your 3 units that you've sold. So here you've got your opening, which was your 385, plus your purchases of 1.7 million, you can see here, minus your closing balance of 679,000. So this is the value we calculated in our previous question. If you calculated the value wrong, but you knew that here in this you have to use your closing balance and you use the same amount, you won't be penalized again. So you would only lose mark once for calculating your closing balance, but you won't lose marks again just because you haven't used the exact value, as long as you've used the value that you were supposed to use, which is your closing balance. Right, as you can see here, we've used 1.7 million for your purchases, but that's not correct because we returned the 3, right? So we've also used the value that we've calculated in our previous question. The 4,875 was the value of the TVs that we returned, which is basically your unit price, your 585,000 divided by 120 to give you your 4,875. Multiply that by 3 because you actually gave those 3 away to give you 1.4 million, and that is the value of your cost of sales. Okay, the next part of your question required us to calculate your markup over your markup percentage, right? So your markup is always calculated over your cost, right? And markup is basically your sales minus your cost of sales divided by your cost of sales times 100. You would multiply it with 100 in order to get a percentage. Otherwise, your answer stays in decimal form. It's important to make sure that you do multiply it. So here you've got your sales minus the cost of sales that you've calculated in your previous question. Once again, it doesn't matter if you calculated the wrong amount, but you know that here you'd need to use your cost of sales. You'd be able to get a mark for your markup, and divided by your cost of sales, you'd get another mark, and multiply that by 100, and that would give you your percentage of 58.2%. Another common question that you'd always have as part of your inventory question would be to calculate the amount of theft. Now, when you're calculating for theft, always remember to calculate in units and not in terms of value. It's very difficult to determine the value first and then the units, right? So it's usually very easy to determine the units, and then you can convert it into value by multiplying it by the cost of what was stolen, the cost price that you have available, right? So when you're calculating something for theft, always make sure that you're calculating on units. Now in this question, it was very interesting because it says refer to information D. So here they're telling you to refer to information D, where Jane has been informed by a cleaner that he suspects Marlon of giving away television sets to his family and friends, and they say provide a calculation to prove whether the information given by the cleaner is true or not. So here you have to see if the information is true or not, right? Always also remember, so when you're calculating a theft question, there's two things to determine: your theoretical inventory and the physical actual inventory you have on hand. So theoretical inventory is actually inventory that is calculated by formula and numbers, right? Which is your opening plus your purchase minus your closing, versus your physical inventory you actually have on hand, right? So your theoretical inventory is more like inventory that you should have had because that's what you purchased, that's what you sold, and that's what you had as an opening balance. So say for example you had opening balance of 10, you purchased 5, and then you sold 3, so therefore you should have had 12. If you've got 10, that means something is missing or something was stolen, or you've given a customer more than you should have given them. Therefore that is your theoretical value. That's just what you simply should have based on the numbers of what you bought, what you sold, and what you had as an opening balance, right? And physically is what you actually go and count to check what you've had physically. So you can see your opening balance was 70, you've got your 70, then you purchased 360, and then you sold 276, and you returned 3 back to your suppliers, right? And that should give you a total of 151 versus what you've got is 145. That means that the cleaning is correct and you do have 6 missing. Okay, moving on to our next question. Here we're asked if Jane is concerned that the final stock of 145 television is not appropriate for her business. Provide a calculation to support her opinion and an explanation. So you will see in this question we asked to support her opinion, which means we are already told indirectly that her inventory ratio for 145 TVs to carry 145 TVs is not appropriate. Now we just have to support her. So we don't have to tell her whether she's correct or not. We have to tell her why she is correct. So unlike our previous question where we had to determine if the cleaner was right or wrong, in this question we already have a direction that Jane already has an opinion, and now we have to support her opinion. So all the time when you want to know, anytime you'd like to know whether the business has enough inventory, what you should be doing is you should be determining how much sales they have, right? So before you even do any complicated formulas, you know you've sold 276 units for the year, right? So if you divide that by the year, you've sold about 23 units per month. How much inventory do you have? You've got 145 units left on hand, which means if you sell at the same rate, which is 23 units, you would actually have inventory for 6 months. So now having inventory for 6 months for any business is not good news, because that's a lot of inventory to have. You've tied up 6 months worth of inventory at once. That is not good, because now you could have used that cash for something else, but now you've got inventory there for 6 months. And I mean, think about it. TVs could become obsolete. The design could become obsolete. Maybe it's no longer in fashion. What are you going to do with so much of inventory? So it's never ideal for businesses to keep so much of inventory, especially in a fast technology-paced environment. You should always keep minimum inventory so that you can sell, and always keep the latest products. So in this case, we can support by telling her that she's got inventory for 6 months, which is not good news. And therefore, the inventory that Jane should be keeping should be less. Suggestions for getting rid of her inventory: she should try and see if she can get some of the inventory returned to suppliers. She should try and discount some of the inventory and sell them so that it sells quicker. Okay, so our next question says, Jane has adjusted the selling price during the year to attract new customers. Comment whether or not this strategy has benefited the business. Provide figures to support your answer, right? So here you can see Firstly is, let's look at the selling price and the number of units that were sold, right? We know that she adjusted her strategy during the year. So here she sold 80 units from March to July, then she sold 30 units, then she sold 150 units. That's a lot, right, compared to what was sold previously. And then she sold 16 units. That looks significantly lower than what was sold even before during the year. So you can see that the strategy that she implemented during the year worked, right? So she was able to sell more units during December. But what happened after December? She increased her price significantly, and therefore she was only able to sell 16 units, right? And we can see that the strategy was effective for only 1 month, and then she increased the price, and it completely backfired because she only sold 16 units. You can also see during the year the cost was lower during the year, but she didn't, just because she reduced her cost, just because her cost price was reduced, she didn't reduce her selling price. And in any competitive market, if your cost price reduces, your selling price has to be reduced, because your competitors would sell at a lower price and they would have a larger customer base than you would. And therefore you can see that the strategy did not benefit her, because she only used it for 1 month, and she didn't use the advantage of having a lower cost price. All right, our last question for this lesson is to provide 2 points to assist Jane in improving the internal control. So there's only limited things you can do with inventory, right? So one of the things is to control your theft, right? And the way you can control your theft is to keep counting your stock continuously, so that you pick up your missing theft immediately. If there's a missing stock, you might not have 6 missing stock, but you'll only have 1 or 2, and you can pick that up immediately and get to the core of the problem, which might in this case be Marlon was providing the TVs to his family and friends, and you can address that problem. The other thing you can do is to implement segregation of duty. Segregation of duty actually means that you have different people doing different roles. So one person would be able to sell the stock, one person has to take the stock out. That means there are different people responsible for different things, and the chances of the fraud is reduced, not eliminated, but rather reduced. You can never eliminate fraud in a business 100%. You can only reduce the chances of it happening. The last thing we would also recommend is too much stock, not keeping too much stock. If there's too much stock on site, that means you give an employee the opportunity to commit a theft. If there is not a lot of stock, it will be easier to control, and there will be less stock to look after. And therefore you would be able to have just enough stock to be able to sell, and there'd be less thieves in the business. Okay, so things we've learned today is how to approach an inventory question. So we've not only learned the numbers and formulas, we've also learned how to deal with things that are more logical in a business. So think of these things during your question, and these will things that will help you get your marks for all your theory questions. Also remember to calculate to determine if you need to use a value or a unit. Also, we've learned how to calculate the cost of sales, closing stock, and inventory theft. Irrespective of the method you're using, Fifo, weighted average, or specific identification, the method will remain the same. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys have learned. If you still have any questions, please feel free to drop me a mail, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, feel free to ask questions in the WhatsApp group, and most importantly, please share this initiative with all your family and friends so that everybody can benefit. Thank you once again so much for listening. Until next time, bye-bye.